Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. You guys send us some great suggestions. And this one, well, this one's a doozy.
Definitely a fascinating one.
You wanted us to look into Pierre-Gaëtan Leymarie. He's a big name from the early Spiritist movement after, of course, Kardec. And we've got a lot to go through.
We do.
Articles, excerpts from a Spiritist encyclopedia, even like some pretty heated quotes from some of his, rivals.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm excited to dive into all of it. We're going to try to figure out what Leymarie's impact on the movement was, the good, the bad, the whole picture.
And it's going to be an interesting picture, that's for sure, because, it's not just the spiritual stuff. This goes way beyond that. We're talking power struggles, the pressure of trying to manage a legacy, and, just human nature, honestly.
Okay, so let's get started. I guess, before we get to all the seances and the spirit photography and all that, let's start with who was this guy before Spiritism even came into his life?
Right. Well, he started out pretty humbly. Born in 1827 in Coul, France. Had to leave school early to work. He eventually landed in Paris, which at that time was a real hub for political activism.
Right.
And Leymarie, he was a strong believer in Republican ideals, so he jumped right into that scene.
Which would explain why he got exiled to Belgium after Napoleon III's coup.
Exactly. He was a man of conviction, that's for sure.
Now, some of the stuff we've got here, it mentions him being in Brazil during that time and even spreading Spiritism there.
Right.
But the timeline seems a little wonky.
It does, yeah.
Doesn't quite add up.
Because, Leymarie himself always said he didn't find Spiritism until he came back to France. So that Brazil connection, it's a bit of a mystery.
A mystery. Okay, so he comes back to France, and this is where things get really interesting. He goes from calling himself an atheist to, becoming a hardcore Spiritist. What caused such a dramatic shift?
It's a good story. Are you ready for this? He was at the dentist. The dentist happened to be a Spiritist. And he convinces Leymarie to go to one of Kardec's circles, the seances.
Right.
Leymarie actually talked about this later, and he said something like, what a twist of fate, all because of a bad tooth, or something along those lines.
Wow, what a story. So he goes to the circle, and then what?
He finds out he's a medium. He could write these long messages automatically without even knowing what he was writing. It just flowed out of him.
Okay, so from skeptic to medium, all thanks to a toothache.
Pretty much, yeah.
And he just gets, just immediately really deep into the movement, right?
Oh, yeah. Full speed ahead. Joined the Paris Society of Spiritist Studies. That's the SP.
Okay.
Became one of their main mediums.
Really?
Yeah. Some of the messages that he channeled, they even ended up in Kardec's Spiritist Review. Like, there's this one from February 1867. Spirit talks about clarity being like the very essence of intelligent movement.
I can see how that would really resonate with those early Spiritists trying to ground their beliefs in reason and science and, observation.
Exactly.
So he's channeling, he's publishing, and I'm getting the sense that he and Kardec, they were actually pretty close.
It seems that way. There's, for example, this note from Leymarie to Kardec where he's apologizing for missing a meeting.
Okay.
A SPI meeting because his child had died. It just shows you there was a real personal connection between them, not just about Spiritism.
That's a powerful detail, that's for sure. So we've got Leymarie, devoted Spiritist, trusted medium, close to Kardec. This really sets him up to step into a leadership role when Kardec passes away, right?
Yeah. 1869, Kardec dies. Leymarie takes over as the head of, they called it the Anonymous Society.
Anonymous Society. Okay, and what was that all about?
So this group, they formed it to manage Kardec's legacy, keep his work going.
So basically, he's in charge of the Spiritist Review, the books, everything.
Everything, yeah.
That's a huge responsibility. And I'm sensing, from what we've got here, that this is where things get a little tricky.
Yeah, not everyone was thrilled with him in charge. But even before all that really blows up, Leymarie gets caught up in this huge scandal that really rocks the whole movement.
The spirit photography.
The spirit photography.
Okay, so this is where things get really juicy. Can you set the scene for us? What was going on with this spirit photography craze?
Right, so these photographers, Bouguer and Firmin, their work was everywhere. People loved it.
I bet.
They claimed to capture spirits in photos, right there with living people.
Oh.
And this wasn't just some sideshow thing. We're talking, they were featured in the Spiritist Review.
Wow. So Leymarie was basically endorsing them. I mean, I bet people were eating this up, this idea of like tangible proof of the afterlife.
Oh, absolutely. It was huge. It definitely put Spiritism on the map for a lot of people. But of course, it also made the movement a target. People were saying it was all a fraud.
Which well, wasn't totally unfounded, right? I mean, there was that photo of Leymarie himself with a supposed spirit.
Oh, yeah. That one was hard to explain away.
So what happened? What was the fallout?
Well, the whole thing eventually blows up. It ends up in court, the trial of the Spiritists.
Okay.
Turns out the photos were fakes, and Leymarie, well, they blamed him for promoting them, so he ends up in prison for a whole year.
A year in prison. That's intense.
Hmm.
What did the Spiritist community, how did they react to all of this?
Divided, some people, they saw him as a martyr, like he was being persecuted for his beliefs.
Right.
Others, they felt betrayed, like he hadn't been careful enough.
So this wasn't just a personal blow to Leymarie. This really, it split the movement itself, right?
Yeah, the spirit photography scandal, it exposed all these cracks that were already there, and it led to this fracturing that would have consequences for a long time.
This is big. All right, well, we're going to have to take a break there, but when we come back, we'll pick up the story and see what happens next. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Pierre-Gaëtan Leymarie. Last time we left off, things weren't looking too good.
Not great.
The spirit photography scandal had blown up, landed him in prison, divided the Spiritist movement. So what happens next? He gets out of prison, and then what?
Well, he kind of just dives right back into Spiritism.
Really?
It's almost like he was trying to, prove his dedication, reassure everyone.
Right.
He goes on these trips to spread the Spiritist doctrine. He even organizes the first Spiritist Congress in France.
Wow.
Oh, and he compiles all these unpublished writings from Kardec into a book, calls it Posthumous Works.
So he's really trying to, rebuild his reputation, make sure Kardec's legacy continues, even after that whole spirit photography mess. But, did it work? Did people trust him again?
It's tough to say. Some people, they saw these efforts as genuine, but others, they weren't so easily convinced. Like Bertha Fropo is a big one.
Right.
Gabriel Delaine. The Rosens, they all had issues with Leymarie, even before the spirit photography thing. They didn't like how he was leading the movement.
So it was more than just the scandal. There were other criticisms, too. Like, what were they saying about him specifically?
Well, they were worried about the Anonymous Society, thought he was turning Spiritism into a business, said he was misusing funds, the money that was supposed to be for spreading Spiritism.
Right.
Fropo was pretty outspoken about all this. She wrote this whole pamphlet, Beaucoup de Lumière, accusing Leymarie of ignoring Kardec's wishes. Like, Kardec wanted to use some of the money to build a home for elderly Spiritists, and Fropo was saying Leymarie wasn't doing that.
Those are pretty serious accusations. So how did Leymarie respond to all this? Did he try to, defend himself or smooth things over?
He fought back, absolutely. He had his supporters, too. There's this pamphlet, Fictions and Insinuations, they called it, basically countering Fropo's attacks. They even include a letter from Leymarie's friend, Charles Fauvetti. He was a philosopher.
Okay.
And basically, Fauvetti said, Leymarie made mistakes, but he's an honest man. You can trust him.
So it was just this war of words, this back and forth.
Yeah, it was a battle for control of the movement, really.
I bet that didn't help public perception of Spiritism much.
Probably not.
All that drama. And then there was that whole controversy with Kardec's book, The Genesis, too.
Oh, right.
Remind me what that was about again.
So this guy, Henri Sauce, he was another one of Leymarie's critics.
Okay.
And he accused Leymarie of messing with the Genesis after Kardec died. Changing things, putting in stuff that wasn't there before.
It's like a copyright battle, but with, spiritual books.
Kind of, yeah. It was all about who had the authority over Kardec's work.
And what did Leymarie say to that?
He denied everything, said it was ridiculous. He brought in all this evidence from the printing process, people who worked on the book, all to prove that any changes that were made, it was all according to Kardec's own notes.
Clever. Using Kardec's own authority to defend himself.
It was a good strategy.
But I'm guessing people still thought he was, straying from Kardec's original vision, right?
Yeah.
What were they pointing to?
Well, a few things. The bookstore, for example.
Right.
Remember how they changed the name? From Library Spirit to Librairie des Sciences Psychologiques?
Yeah, wasn't that seen as Leymarie trying to, distance himself from Kardec?
Exactly. And then there was the Anonymous Society. They renamed that, too.
So they weren't so anonymous anymore.
Not really. And then there was the stuff that was showing up in the Spiritist Review under Leymarie's watch.
What kind of stuff?
Oh, they called it strange things. Like, there's this article about Spiritist baptism for babies.
A Spiritist baptism.
Yeah. And another one talked about a seance, but it was with, like, a horoscopist. They were reading palms and doing birth charts and all that.
Horoscopes. That does seem a little I don't know, a little out there for Spiritism. It's definitely not the scientific approach that Kardec was known for.
Right. It felt like Leymarie was mixing Spiritism with all these other things, occultism, superstition. It made a lot of people uncomfortable.
So he's fighting accusations about money, about changing Kardec's teachings, and then he gets involved with theosophy and Rostanguism.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, I don't think most people listening know what those are.
You're right. We should probably explain that a little. So theosophy, it was this big spiritual movement, kind of a blend of Eastern mysticism and Western occultism all mixed together. It was getting pretty popular around this time.
Really? So was it like a rival to Spiritism?
In some ways, yeah. They were both trying to understand the spiritual world, but they had very different ideas about how to do it.
Okay. So how did Leymarie get involved with these theosophists? It seems like that would be, I don't know, kind of controversial.
Well, at first, the Spiritist Review was actually pretty supportive of them.
Really?
They even wrote an article celebrating the founding of the Theosophical Society back in 1877.
Wow. So they were like buddies, at least for a while.
It seems that way. And Leymarie was also involved with this group, the Scientific Society for Psychological Studies, which, get this, was at the same address as the Spiritist Society.
Interesting. So he's openly associating with these theosophists, even though they had some pretty fundamental differences with Spiritism, right?
Yeah, but Leymarie argued that they were all working towards the same goal, even if they didn't always agree on the details. He even said something like, "We join with the Theosophical Society in its intentions," or something along those lines.
Okay, but this joining of intentions, it didn't last long, did it? Didn't Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, say some pretty harsh things about reincarnation? Which, I mean, that's like Spiritism 101, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She was not a fan of reincarnation. In her book, Isis Unveiled, she basically says that it's an exception, not the rule. Which, for Spiritists, I mean, that's a huge deal. They believe that reincarnation is central to how souls evolve.
So that's a pretty big disagreement. How did Leymarie react to that?
Well, there's this funny story. Apparently, he paid to have Isis Unveiled translated into French.
Okay.
But then, Blavatsky, she reads the translation and she hates it. Thinks the translator completely missed the point. So she burns the whole manuscript.
No way. All that work, all that money, gone up in smoke?
Yep.
That's gotta hurt. So I'm guessing after that, the Spiritist Review, they weren't so friendly with the Theosophists anymore?
Not so much, no. And of course, people like Foucault, they used this whole theosophy thing against Leymarie.
Makes sense.
They said it showed he wasn't a true Spiritist, that he was diluting Kardec's teachings.
Okay, so Theosophy's a bust. But what about Rostanguism? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, it's a pretty obscure one. So basically, it's based on the writings of this guy, Jean-Baptiste Rostand. He claimed to have all these direct revelations from spirits.
Okay.
And his book, The Four Gospels, it was a big hit with his followers. Especially this guy, Jean Guérin, he called it the revelation of the revelation.
And how does Leymarie get mixed up in all of this?
Remember Charles Fouty, the guy who defended Leymarie during the spirit photography scandal?
Yeah.
Well, he was a big fan of Rostand's ideas, and he was close to Guérin.
Okay, so he brings Rostanguism into the picture. I'm guessing this wasn't a popular move.
Not at all. Guérin had inherited a lot of money from Rostand, and he wanted to use it to promote the Four Gospels, spread the teachings as far as he could.
Smart.
Yeah, and he saw the Spiritist movement as a way to reach a wider audience. So he offers to donate copies of the Four Gospels to people who subscribe to the Spiritist Review.
That's one way to get your book out there. Did Leymarie go for it?
He did. Not only that, he gave Guérin the addresses of all the subscribers to the review.
Wow. Talk about a marketing dream. I'm sure Fropo and her crew were thrilled about that.
Oh yeah, they're furious. Fropo wrote this whole thing about how Leymarie had been pushing Rostand's Gospels on everyone for 4 years. She called it a betrayal of Kardec and Spiritism.
So things are getting even more heated. What happens next?
Well, to make matters worse, a pamphlet comes out defending Rostand, and it directly attacks Kardec.
No way. They're attacking Kardec while trying to win over Spiritists.
Yeah, it was a bold move.
So what did Delane and the UEF, what do they do?
Delane writes his own pamphlet, condemns the attacks on Kardec, accuses the Rostanguists of trying to cause trouble. He basically said, look, this is a threat to Spiritism as we know it.
So we've got Leymarie caught in the middle of all this. His reputation's in tatters. The movement's falling apart. What happens next? Does it get any worse for him?
Oh, yeah, it gets worse. On top of all this, there's trouble brewing for the Anonymous Society, financially.
Uh-oh. This is where it gets really interesting for me, because now it's not just about, ideas and beliefs. It's about the actual, business of managing a growing movement. And that's never easy.
No, it's not. And unfortunately for Leymarie, things are about to go from bad to worse.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there for now.
Yeah.
But when we come back, we'll find out what happens to Leymarie, to Kardec's legacy, to the whole Spiritist movement. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive on Pierre-Gaëtan Leymarie. And, well, when we left off, things were not looking so good for him or for the Anonymous Society.
No, not good at all. All that controversy and the financial troubles, it was just too much. In 1895, the Anonymous Society declared bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy, wow. So what happened to all of Kardec's work then? The books, the writings, the whole legacy?
Well, it gets even more complicated because remember how Kardec's widow, Amélie Boudet, she left everything to the Anonymous Society.
To keep his work going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when the Anonymous Society went bankrupt, some of Madame Kardec's distant relatives, they challenged her will in court. They said they were the rightful heirs to all of Kardec's stuff, the books, the manuscripts, even his furniture.
So it was this whole legal battle over who controlled Kardec's legacy even after his death.
Exactly. And in the end, Leymarie lost. The court ordered him to return all of Kardec's assets to those relatives.
Wow, what a blow. I mean, after dedicating years to preserving this work, to have it all taken away like that.
It's a tough break, for sure. But even after all that, Leymarie still manages to hold on to a piece of Kardec's legacy.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Remember how the bookstore's name was changed? From Library Spirit to Librairie des Sciences Psychologiques?
Yeah, and that caused a lot of controversy, right? People thought Leymarie was trying to distance himself from Kardec.
Right. But after the Anonymous Society folded, Leymarie opens his own bookstore in 1895, and guess what he calls it?
Librairie des Sciences Psychologiques.
Yep, the same name that had caused so much trouble before.
So even though he lost control of the official Kardec estate, he was able to maintain a connection through this new bookstore.
Exactly. And get this, he used this bookstore to house the rest of Kardec's archives, the ones that weren't claimed by the relatives.
So in a way, he was still a guardian of Kardec's work.
He was. And those archives, they ended up becoming part of the Virtual Museum of Spiritism and the Allan Kardec project.
Wow. So even after all he went through, Leymarie still played a part in making sure those writings were preserved for future generations. That says a lot about him.
It does. He was a complex guy, no doubt, but his dedication to Spiritism, it never really went away.
So what happens to Leymarie in these final years after he opens the bookstore?
Well, he keeps running the bookstore, stays involved in the movement, but his influence isn't what it used to be. His health declines, and he passes away in 1901.
His last will and testament. Do we know anything about that?
We do, actually. The Virtual Museum of Spiritism, they found a document with his last wishes. And it's interesting because he asks for a simple cremation.
Cremation. That seems a little, I don't know, unexpected for a spiritist, especially back then.
It was unusual, yeah. He doesn't say why, but maybe he saw it as a more rational choice, in line with his scientific side.
It's definitely intriguing. But what about the rest of the will? Any grand pronouncements about Spiritism or the future of the movement?
Most of it is personal stuff, actually. He talks about his love for his wife, Marina, and their children. Even apologizes if he caused her any pain.
It's a nice reminder that he wasn't just this public figure caught up in controversies. He was also a husband, a father.
Yeah, and there's this one part where he expresses concern that his cremation might upset his siblings. They were more traditionally religious. He even mentions his sister Emily, says he's fond of her and hopes she'll understand.
That's a really sweet detail.
It is. And while he doesn't really lay out any big plans for Spiritism, he does leave the Spiritist Review to his wife and a group of close collaborators.
So the journal continues after his death.
It does. Marina takes over as editor and keeps it going until she dies in 1904. Then their son, Paul Leymarie, he inherits the journal and runs it until 1918.
Wow, the Leymarie family. Their connection to Spiritism continued even after Pierre-Gaëtan passed away. What a journey. From those humble beginnings to political exile, spiritual awakening, scandal, leadership, downfall, and in the end, a kind of redemption through preserving Kardec's work.
It really is quite a story. He was a complicated figure, that's for sure, but you can't deny the impact he had on the movement after Kardec's death.
Yeah, he left behind a complicated legacy. But even with all the controversies and the accusations and the financial ruin, he never gave up on Spiritism. And in a way, he helped make sure those ideas would survive.
Definitely. I mean, look at the archives he helped preserve, the books he published, the journal he kept alive. It all played a part.
It reminds you that history is rarely black and white. Leymarie, he was kind of a hero and a villain all at the same time. A visionary, but also a bit of a, well, let's just say he made some questionable choices.
And that's what makes studying history so fascinating. It's all about those complexities, the nuances, the unintended consequences.
So before we wrap up our deep dive into Leymarie's life, what happened to the Spiritist Review after Paul Leymarie stepped down?
In 1918, it was bought by Jean Meyer, a philanthropist and a spiritist. He made sure it continued, so Kardec's ideas kept spreading to new generations.
It's a fitting ending to this story, wouldn't you say? Leymarie might be gone, but the movement he dedicated his life to, it keeps going.
It does, and it keeps evolving.
Which brings us to the question, what can we learn from all of this? From this deep dive into early Spiritism and this complicated figure, Pierre-Gaëtan Leymarie. What do you think?
What stands out to me is that struggle to stay true to an original vision while also letting a movement grow and adapt. You've got people like Bertha Fropo who believed that any change from Kardec's teachings was a betrayal. And then you've got Leymarie who, yeah, he was committed to those principles, but also wasn't afraid to try new things, push the boundaries a little.
It's a challenge that every movement faces, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep the essence of something while also adapting to a changing world?
Exactly. And I think Leymarie, in his own way, he really wrestled with that throughout his life.
He certainly did. Well, to our listener out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating world of early Spiritism. Read Kardec, read Leymarie, read their critics. Form your own opinions about Leymarie's legacy. Was he a visionary leader or a misguided meddler?
There's no easy answer, and that's the beauty of history, right? It makes you think, makes you question, makes you realize that things are never simple as they seem.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the life and times of Pierre-Gaëtan Leymarie. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.